Hello, and welcome to today's Safety and Health webcast, Leadership Analytics, the missing piece in your journey to safety culture excellence, sponsored by Predictive Solutions. My name is Kyle Morrison. I'm the Senior Associate Editor with Safety and Health magazine, and I'll be moderating today's session. Thank you for joining us. In a few minutes, we'll start the presentation, but first I'd like to go over some housekeeping items. The views of the speaker and his organization are his own and do not necessarily reflect those of the National Safety Council or Safety and Health magazine. Mention of any commercial enterprise, product, or publication does not mean the Council or the magazine endorse them. At the end of today's webcast, we'll have a question and answer session. To ask a question, simply type it in the text box located in the lower left-hand corner of your screen, then click the Submit Question button. You can feel free to ask your question at any point during the presentation. You don't need to wait until the Q&A session to begin. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can, but due to the large number of participants today, we may not get to all of the questions. However, all unanswered questions will be forwarded on to today's speaker. For basic troubleshooting information, please click the Help button located on your screen. At the end of the webcast, you'll be asked to complete an evaluation survey, and I'll talk a little bit more about that after the presentation concludes. This webcast will be archived so you can access it after today's live presentation. To view this webcast and all of our past webcasts, go to safetyandhealthmagazine.com/events. With that, I think we're ready to begin. Our speaker today is Chuck Penninger. Chuck is the process change leader at Predictive Solutions, and he has more than 25 years of experience in designing, implementing, and evaluating culture step change initiatives. Chuck?
Thanks. Thanks, Cal, for that introduction. Thanks, everyone, for joining. I'm excited to get started for today. And wait, 1 second. I'm having some issues advancing the slide. There we go. Okay. All right, so we're off. Again, thanks for signing in, coming and joining me. I'm excited to get started. We have a lot of information to share with you. You know, over the last 25 years, I've been focusing on different techniques and philosophies to try to get leaders engaged in safety and create this dynamic safety culture. I just want to start off with a question. How many of you are really excited to get up in the morning? Right? I have a great opportunity to work with amazing organizations and have really talented coworkers, and I'm excited to wake up every morning because I know that I can make a difference in people's lives. So what really gives me this sense of urgency is our vision. Now, our vision at Predictive Solutions is to eliminate deaths on the job this century. And I believe with good, passionate visions, leaders and employees can create amazing opportunities. And I'll describe later why I think having this impassioned vision is essential to reaching safety culture excellence. But for some, the journey appears too vast, too large, and without that sense of urgency in organizations, seemingly impossible. Now, many organizations believe they start out on this journey to safety cultural excellence, but soon get derailed, get discouraged because it's a long way, or simply move on to the next flavor of the month. The Appalachian Trail is just outside my back door, and every year hundreds of people trek from Georgia all the way up to Maine to, test themselves. It takes 6 months. And this is my brother-in-law, Kevin. He prepared for a whole year to begin his journey. Similar to many of you in your organizations, right? He read books, he got enabling technology, he had all the latest equipment, and he thought he was prepared for this long 6-month journey. So he had the roadmap, right? He had the motivation, he had the vision. But a month into his journey, he got derailed by a serious sprained ankle, right? His journey stalled out. And like many of you who believe they have a good plan, but fail to follow through, also get stalled out. So today, we're going to talk about a similar journey, one that can be long, filled with unexpected barriers, and sometimes really hard to see the forest for the trees. So we're going to talk about this roadmap to safety culture excellence. And I have to give a shout out to Kyle, who's our host. He just wrote an excellent article, if you've not read it, on what is world-class safety. So if you haven't read that, take a look at that. But today, we're going to talk about the leadership part of ensuring the organization reaches safety culture excellence. Now, this is going to require some engagement from leaders and employees. It's going to require people be engaged and really pull through. So I've seen in my 25 years companies go through different phases in safety, some starting on the journey, some are succeeding, some are leading, and really to move to good to great, if I can reuse that overused phrase, but they need to take the step change. And I see companies come to this plateau, and to really reach that next phase, they have to consciously use some step change or some process change initiatives. So in today's webinar, I'm going to talk about a couple of things that I really think are important to creating this step change. Right? The first is going to focus on the people aspect of the organization. I'm going to focus on how we need to create that sense of urgency, how we need to get the leadership truly engaged in safety. And just by doing that, a lot of people become best in class. But that's not the end of our roadmap, right? What we need to do is not only look at the people part, but we have to look at the process for doing that. How can we count? How can we track how well we're doing? And that's where I'm going to talk about safety analytics, and leadership analytics, because those things, along with some supporting technology to assess, improve, and sustain your initiatives, can really help us on our roadmap to safety cultural excellence. So let's jump in. I mean, before we can get to a destination of safety cultural excellence, we need to create the environment for successful change. We first need to create the sense of urgency. Otherwise, people are just going to act busy. I see a lot of companies who try to make change, and really they're not, they're just not making a difference. And it's because they lack that sense of urgency. So I really think that sometimes organizations mistake action for progress. So it's common for new safety initiatives to start out with a workshop, they teach new skills, and then people just sit back and hope, right, that people are going to comply. So without that proper change management techniques, this process is going to flounder and become just another flavor of the month. So what we really need is we need to create that sense of urgency. And there's a lot of gurus out there who talk about this. And one that I read a lot is Jim and John. And Jim says without that sense of urgency, that desire loses its value. So no matter how big of a desire we have, if we don't have that sense of urgency, the organization's not going to get behind that change. So we've got to find a way of creating that urgency. And then John Cotter, who's kind of the grandfather of organizational change, writes that a state in which complacency is virtually absent. So to have that, urgency, I think is essential. But the problem with safety as the metric is how we become motivated. And unfortunately, for many organizations, people lack that organization urgency. And the only time they initiate change is when something terrible happens, right? And they're fear-based urgency or reacting from a burning platform. And if something bad happens, then the whole organization rallies around and figures out what we can do. The problem with that is that a lot of companies are doing good at safety, right? We're not hurting people, so why do we need to change? That's the most difficult thing, and that's why we need to employ change management techniques. Now, there's a lot of gurus out there in change management. The one that I mentioned earlier, John Cotter, has an 8-stage model. And this is one of the most well written about. He has written books almost on every one of these stages of change. But if you're interested, you can look up Leading Change. That's his book. That's kind of the foundation of this. But really, he talks about how first you have to create that sense of urgency and then make sure you get the vision right. So part of getting the vision right is making sure you have your leaders engaged. And that's the part that I'm going to spend some time talking about. I think it's the leader's job to align people and the processes with a particular vision. So without a good vision, like I mentioned earlier, you're not going to be able to really make a difference and reach those next levels in safety excellence. As a matter of fact, I think we have far too many safety managers in organizations. And I make a big difference between management and leadership. Management, to me, is doing things right, where leadership is doing the right thing, right? So managers manage behaviors. Leaders really inspire others. So you need to create that sense of urgency, get leadership involved, and besides, to me, I believe that we have far too many safety managers out there. You know, when someone goes up to someone and says, you know, you need to put on your safety glasses, right? That's managing their behavior. But what we have to do is have more leaders. Those leaders that go up and say, you know what? I know it's uncomfortable or fogging up, but I need you to wear those glasses because I don't want to see you lose your eyesight, right? That's leading safety. And I'm not the only one that thinks safety leadership is important. One of the people that I respect a lot is Dr. Dan Peterson. And I sat down with Dan on a number of occasions and chatted with him, and I fully agree. If you have not read any Dan Peterson, he is a great author to read. But this quote from him is, I think, really fundamental. Right? Leadership is infinitely more important than policy. For the leader, through his or her actions and decisions, sends a clear message to the organization about which policies are important and which are not. So we need to create that sense of urgency. We need to get the leadership involved. And not only that, but we have to have them engaged. Now, many of you on the call, if you go up to any of your senior level executives and you ask them, you know, do you support safety? I would imagine 100% of them would say, yes, 100% I support safety. I'm all about safety. Right? Now, if you followed up with a question, what do you do to support safety? You might get a pause. Well, you know, I send the checks. You know, oh, we have a safety moment before every meeting. Oh, yeah, that's great. But what does the employee see? Do they believe you're truly engaged? Because I think a lot of, again, safety managers are involved in safety, but they're not truly engaged. That takes strong leadership. Now, you probably heard the difference between involvement and engagement, right? I like to use the example between the chicken and the pig when it comes to breakfast, right? The chicken is just involved in breakfast, where, you know, the pig is truly engaged in breakfast. And that's kind of what we need. We need people to be truly engaged in safety. So that leads to the big question. How do we develop safety leadership capabilities, right? So in the first half of my discussion today, I talked a lot about how we need to create that supportive environment that will ready us for a journey to cultural excellence, right? Organizations need to create that urgency for change, plan for change, and especially how we need leaders, not just managers, to be engaged and tie our journey to that vision, or actually create a vision for a journey, right? This is the first half of the roadmap. Now, we have our backpacks full, we're motivated, we have sturdy boots, we have unknown terrain ahead. So what do? Well, what we need to do is focus on this second half. So I'm going to go through how we can use some analytics to help track and trend our leadership engagements. And I'm going to go through a couple of case studies and recommendations to give you something to go home and try. So when I talk about change, right, and I ask people, you know, how safe of a company are we, right? Or if someone that you work with, like, comes up to you and says, how safe of a company is it that you work for? You know, what would you say, right? Many people would say, yeah, I think pretty safe, right? Many of you would scratch your head and say, well, yeah, I think we're pretty safe compared to others in our industry, right? But how do they measure that, right? They'll probably say, well, you know, our OSHA recordable rate is 1.0. That's pretty good compared to the rest of our industry. But does that tell us how safe of an organization it is? I don't think so. I think many organizations are really good at measuring injury statistics. They're not very good at measuring safety. statistics. We need to identify some of those safety statistics that will give us an idea of how we're doing, not just how we're not doing, right? We need to create some positive, achievement-oriented safety statistics, not just avoidance-oriented negative statistics. And besides, many of our companies are at this point now, they only have a couple of injuries a year, right? That's not really a good measure of how good we're doing, right? I'm not suggesting we throw away injury statistics, right? We're not going to do that. But eventually, we're going to come to a point that they're no longer going to be a good description of how safe of an organization we are. And besides, give an example, it would be like a football coach trying to motivate his team by saying, go out there and don't lose. Right? I want you to go out there and don't lose. Okay, coach, we're with you. What do you want us to do? Well, I don't want you to lose. Same way with safety. What do you want us to do? I don't want you to get hurt. Sure, I'm not going to get hurt, right? It never happens to me. So it's not the way that we motivate people. So again, people have been talking about leading indicators, I think, for a good dozen years. And I still get people saying, well, Chuck, just give me a handful of leading indicators I need to focus on. And that's almost impossible. Everyone is on a different path in their journey, right? Different things have waylaid them in their journey. But nonetheless, we need to find some leading indicators. Now, for those of you who've not heard of this, but lagging indicators are things that come afterwards, right? So number of injuries, OSHA recordable rate, incident rate, lost time rate, days away from work, those are all lagging indicators. Leading indicators come before, right? What are some activities or processes that we're following or doing that if we do all these right, we won't have any of those lagging indicators? So a good example that I use often is about a year ago, I set a New Year's resolution, and I want to lose weight. And like many people, New Year's resolutions, wanting to lose weight, right? I started thinking to myself, you know what? That's just like my clients that I work with saying, you know, I want to get to zero. Okay, well, that's a good long-term goal, but that's not really what's going to get the change to happen. So I said, I need to eat my own dog food. I need to identify some leading indicators of what I want. I don't really necessarily want to lose weight per se. I just want to be healthier, right? So what I did is I created 5 leading indicators for myself last year. I got a pedometer, started counting how many steps I took, right? Want to get 10,000 a day. I started tracking because my pedometer tracks sleep. So I started tracking how many hours of sleep I get. I was averaging like 5 to 6 hours a night. And many of you who have kids, you know, when they go to bed, you can get a lot done. So I set a goal for myself of at least 7 hours of sleep. I travel a lot, so I tried to eat more healthy, to do 3 days of aerobic activities. And then my 5th leading indicator would be to have a hobby. So my son started taking guitar. So I thought, you know, that would be fun to do together. So I picked up the guitar. Now, it's really difficult for me to practice, so I got myself a little travel guitar that fits up in the smallest of overheads that I can take with me. And instead of going back to my hotel room and, you know, answering a million emails, I practice. So if I do all these 5 things, right, as leading indicators, hopefully I'll be healthier. I mean, as a result, over the last year, I lost 10 pounds, right? That's not kind of where I wanted to be, but I'm still tracking lagging indicators. Doesn't mean that I'm not, but I'm focusing on those leading things. So that's the same thing we need to do. But when I talk to a lot of companies, they put out their different phrases and different terms. And I'm sure many of you have seen these, right? Target zero is a very common one. And you know what? I can't argue with target zero, right? We don't want to see anyone get hurt. But you know what? I think many companies judge their safety initiatives by this metric. And sometimes you're not giving the culture change enough time to really impact this metric. So, I mean, I'm not saying we should get rid of that, right? It's the only morally acceptable target, but target zero is not how we drive change. Get out there and don't lose the game, right? We need people to drive that change. And that's why I spent so much time talking about how we need leaders to get out there and lead the change, drive that change. I mean, a long time ago, I saw how organizations would introduce new safety initiatives like behavior-based safety and measure the successes by those initiatives by injury rate. And really, that's not what we want, right? What we need to do is focus on how we make the change happen. So we got to get leaders to get out there and lead and drive that change. So the question that I have is, how do we know our leadership engagement is on target? How do we measure that? And that's part of the talk that I have with you today, right? I mean, as a discipline, safety professionals, we collect a lot of data, right? We have what they call big data, as a matter of fact. We collect this information. And if you go to any business journal, you can't help but see big data in everything you read. Business intelligence, big data. Well, we collect a lot of that. So if you're interested, a couple of books that I would recommend. One is Competing on Analytics by Davenport. That's kind of the grandfather of analytics. More recently, Eric Siegel wrote the book Predictive Analytics, and that really is another good book to read. Neither one of these books talk about safety, right? They talk about business things. And that, again, is disheartening to me because we can learn so much from it. One recent book that I also read that I really enjoyed is by Nate Silver. Now, you might recognize Nate Silver. He did a lot of things on cybermetrics, with the baseball, and in his book he talks about predicting elections. But I really love the title of this book, The Signal and the Noise, Why So Many Predictions Fail But Some Don't. Let me pull out a quote for you. When catastrophe strikes, we look for a signal in the noise, anything that might explain the chaos that we see around us and bring order to the world again. I mean, let's face it. Our safety organizations are noisy. We collect a lot of information. And if we could just identify that signal in all that noise, we could get in front of injuries and predict them and prevent them. And that leads me to my first metric, right? Predictive analytics. You heard me talk about that earlier. Predictive analytics really is not just amassing a lot of data and having, statisticians run information. It's really asking new types of questions, exploring hunches, and making data-driven decisions. We have Nick, who is on our staff. He's our data scientist. And, he knows nothing about safety, right? So we have to ask the right questions so he can go in and explore this and help us look at our 220 million inspections and observations in our data set. As a matter of fact, we worked at Carnegie Mellon, and they helped us identify a predictive model to help predict injuries, right? And I know you're asking, wow, yeah, that's like crystal ball, magic 8-ball predicting injuries. But yeah, I mean, this is a totally another webinar. And if you're interested in our research that we've done with Carnegie Mellon, you can go to our website and download our paper. But the question is, through this predictive analytics, can we predict injuries? Yeah, we're pretty good at it, 80 to 97%. But the problem with that is even if people collect the right things, I often see people fall into what I call this venomous cycle. Let's take behavior-based safety again, for example. People go out, they do training, they get all excited about the initiative, they go out, they do observations, they provide feedback, and then they turn this information in. And either it sits in filing cabinets or an electronic filing cabinet called Excel, right, and nobody looks at it. Now, the next time I go out, I may not be as motivated to write good stuff down because, you know what, no one's looking at it. And then pretty soon, people are pencil whipping it. And then no one's looking at the data because people believe everything's all pencil whipped and they don't believe the data. And you get into this venomous cycle, and then pretty soon it just turns into, the flavor of the week, some program that we used to do. So what we need to do is turn that around. We need to create this virtuous circle. Right? I believe that we can capture this information real time. There's enabling technology out there that you can get an app, collect these observations, for instance, and analyze that information and get in front of the injury and predict it, right? And when people start seeing the value proposition in collecting this information, making their workplace safer, getting things fixed, they do better observations and your quality will improve and you get this virtuous circle. And then you become the learning organization that everyone's been talking about forever. So what we need to do to make that happen is collect better data. And that's where I talk about safety analytics. Now, safety analytics is acting on that valuable observation intelligence and making data-driven decisions. But we have to get better data. I think we collect a lot of data, but a lot of it, we need to get more color in that data. So to do that, here's my first recommendation. One, if you do have an audit, inspection, or observation program, if you do see something that's risky, unsafe, uncompliant, I want you to give me a severity. Okay. Now, I know there may be some of our insurance guys on the phone, and you probably have a 12 by 12 matrix, but I just want to do something simple, like a 2 by 2, right? You want to look at the likelihood and severity. So if the likelihood of somebody getting hurt is relatively low and severity, if they do get hurt, is low, I want you to mark that as low. So if somebody's walking down the hall without their safety glasses on, but it's a completely safe environment and they don't have them on, it's relatively low. If they're grinding without their face protection, that might be life-threatening. So first recommendation, if you see something risky, give me a severity. Now, let me give you an example. This location had a compliance inspection process, and for 3 years they collected close to 16,000 inspections, close to 1 million items. They saw close to 16,000 things unsafe, 98% safe. They revamped their process and did more of a behavioral observation thing. They saw in 5 years 188,000, 7.2 million behaviors, close to 70,000 risky things, and they were about 99% safe. So just by looking at this data, that doesn't give me a whole lot to go on. I mean, 1% increase in percent safe, does that really tell us anything? Right? So let's talk about the rest of the story. So if we add color to that, if we add severity, now this gives me a little bit more to go on. All right, so if we look at the first compliance version, you can see that the majority of observations are all low and medium. So not wearing glasses, housekeeping, those types of things. And to me, that says the culture isn't quite ready yet. And this is also a leadership analytic opportunity. So the culture may not be ready yet to record something that is high or life threat. As a matter of fact, in this location, I had one guy tell me, yeah, I put down a life threat and I got yelled at for doing it. I'm never doing it again. So that's the caution that I have. If you're going to do this, you have to ready your organization. If someone puts down a life threat, it's a good thing, right? We just prevented somebody possibly from losing their life. Now, 5 years later, you can see that we're collecting a better diversity of severity. Same organization, of course, they're evolving, but 60% low, 33% medium, a lot more high, and about the same percentage of life-threatening behaviors. So to me, this says that the culture opened up. They're more willing to put down something that's medium and high. And again, I believe this is kind of a leadership measurement as well. So, second recommendation, assess the quality of your observers. Now, you may have a lot of different ways of looking at quality. Some people just look at the amount of observations people do, but I want a little bit more data. I want a little bit more to go on. So here's how I measure quality in the observation process or audits or inspections. One, look at the participation. How many per week? How many safe items are looked at per inspection? How many risky things are looked at per inspection? And then if somebody does see something risky, what's the relative severity, and did they write a comment? And then out of all those, what percent are 100% safe? I call that my pencil whipping metric. So what does that tell us? Let me show you an example. So for this, I know this may be kind of small, but 5 stars is great, 2 stars not so great. So in participation in this employee, you can see that they participate a lot, right? 4 stars. They see a whole lot of safe things, but they hardly see any risky things. And when they do see something risky, it's relatively low severity. And they rarely write comments, but they have a whole lot of their observations turned in with 100% safe. So to me, this says something's going on in the culture. And again, another leadership metric. If people are uncomfortable putting down something risky and writing a comment, that tells me something. I call this a pencil whipper. I'm not sure if everyone has heard that phrase before, but people are just checking off boxes. They call that pencil whipping. So another version of a pencil whipper is this. This is kind of like the malicious compliance. I'll do your stupid observation. right? You can see in this example, they're doing a whole lot of observations, right? They're in the 95th percentile, but they're only checking off a few safe and a few risky things, not really severe, no comments. So what they're doing is they see one thing, yep, Chuck's wearing his glasses, check off safe, and I'm done with this stupid observation. See, in that case, what we're doing is trying to identify why. Why are people feeling that way? To me, what this says is they're not valuing this information, not getting put back to them. Again, it's a cultural metric. Now, this one is kind of interesting. This is another example. I call this the fault finder or the police officer. If you look at how this data goes, they're out there participating, but the only time they see something is something when it's risky, high severity, and they write a lot of comments. So really, this says that the process needs to be changed, because the only time they do an observation, audit, or inspection is when they see something wrong. And this gets people in the mind of just writing a ticket, right? That's not the kind of culture we want. We want a coaching culture. And the last example, this kind of could be misconstrued as a bad observer, but without looking at this metrics, we would have no way of knowing. Now, I often see this with like corporate safety executives or other executives or directors, right? Their participation is relatively low, but everything else is really good. So when you look at this just by the number of observations or inspections that are going out, you would say, well, they're not doing really well. They're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Maybe they're busy, but when they do go out, you can see that they're doing a great job of collecting good information. So without actually looking at the quality, you would have no idea. Okay, so first recommendation, collect severity. Second recommendation, look at quality. Third recommendation, if you are out there and you're observing risky things, I want you to make sure you track those open issues to closure. So if you're out there and you can't close something on the spot, make sure that you track it, because the quicker we track and close something, the more responsive of a leadership team we look like. So in my system, if you close it within 48 hours, it doesn't go down as a late fix. All the ones that don't get closed out within 48 hours, I call that a late fix. So if we can track these, again, we have a metric that we can be achievement-oriented on. And then once we get that, we have to communicate that information, find a way of making sure that people see that we're using that information. So I want to finish off kind of this talk by focusing on leadership analytics. So if we do roll out a new initiative, we do get that sense of urgency. We get the leadership to be totally engaged, and we're measuring the right things. How do we know if our leaders are really engaged in the process? How do we know that they're supporting it? And that's part of what I call leadership analytics. So leadership analytics is using your data to discover gaps in engagement and or safety culture. So I already gave a couple of examples of how you can use those quality metrics to identify gaps in safety culture, right? But here are some examples. Here's a case study. Now, this case study was with a large utility, right? 5,500 employees, 3,000 field employees across 8 different states. Big, diverse organization, lots of individual cultures within those states. And we went in and did a cultural analysis beforehand. And one of the things that we kept hearing again and again is that the leadership is disengaged. And some actively say, well, they don't really care. We haven't seen our director in years. Now, when this got back to the leadership, they were completely thrown off guard. They're like, no, we support safety. We give them the best equipment. If they need anything, they got it. But that's not what the culture needed. So we dug a little bit deeper, and I looked at, how they did things. And we changed the little things around. We changed their compensation plan, for one thing. So we changed their scorecard. Now, at that time, their scorecard, safety was 20%. And of that 20%, 50% were on leadership metrics, actually measuring leadership behaviors. The other 50% was on lagging indicators, OSHA recordable injury rate and DART rate. Now, this is the kicker. The leadership team must meet their leadership metrics first, or they're not going to get paid out on the rest of their 50%. So to do that, we had to create a new process. We had everyone from the senior level executives down to the team leads go out and do what they call crew observations, not audits, not inspections, but crew observations. They also increased safety meeting participation and regional safety reviews. But let me kind of dig a little bit deeper into these crew observations. So these are the 50% of their goal, leadership engagement goals. For the executives and directors, from the CEO to the SVPs and directors, right? They had to conduct a certain amount of crew visits. The executives had to do 3 crew visits per quarter, directors 6 per quarter. And then they had to do leadership engagement activities. The executives had to do 4 per year, directors 4 per year. Now, let me give you a little bit of insight on leadership engagement activities. Like I asked before, if you ask any of your leaders, do you support safety? Almost 100% of them would say, sure, I support safety. And again, if you ask them, well, what do you do to support safety? Well, we actually gave them activities that they can do. So a handful of leaders, safety people, and technical training people sat down and said, all right, what could we do to demonstrate that the leaders are engaged in safety? So we gave them activities that they can perform. So again, the executives and directors had to do it 4 of these per year, 1 per quarter, right? Attend a safety meeting, be involved in union safety team efforts, kick off a leadership training, create and implement proactive initiatives. So we gave them a list of things to do. Now, for a senior level executive, this is easy, right? I can schedule this on my calendar and do this and get out there and support safety. Now, for the rest of the organizational leadership, right, they had cascading goals. So the managers and supervisors had 6 and 9, respectively. And they had to do a certain amount of engagement activities as well, 6 and 12, respectively. Now, during these rollouts, I had some leaders come up to me and say, you know what, Chuck, I'm a little bit nervous about going out and doing these crew visits. You know, I don't know anything about, electric things, and, you know, I'm not willing to tell people that they're doing something wrong. I'm thinking of this CFO, Chief Financial Officer. I said, look, I don't want you to go out there and do a compliance audit. All I want you to do is go out there and talk with the crew. I said, well, what do you want me to talk about? So what I did is I developed 4 leadership engagement questions. I said, okay, what I want you to do is go out there, pick a crew member and say, hey, what are you working on today? These guys are proud. They'll be happy to tell you how good they are. Oh, well, you know, Chuck, we're setting poles today. And then you can follow up with the second question. Wow, now that seems pretty risky. What's the worst thing that can happen? Oh, well, you know, it's a bad day if we have contact. And then third question, wow, so what are you doing to keep each other safe? Oh, well, you know, we have a spotter. We make sure we ground out. We put up rubber on the lines. You know, we don't want to touch it. Oh, that's great. You know, is there anything I can do to help? You know, and again, most of these executives went out with another safety representative or another leader. So if they did say, well, yeah, you know what, we need a new set of gloves or glasses, right, make sure that they follow up on that. But these 4 really helped. And again, a few months later, I saw the same CFO, and he's like, Chuck, you wouldn't believe what these guys go through. And he was one of the strongest advocates after we went out on some of these crew visits. So did this make a difference, right? Well, here's some more leadership analytics for you. Before we did the step change initiative, which is what they called it, they were averaging about 200 crew visits per month, mostly done by safety people. After the initiative, they did 13,000 per month. They're up to close, more like around 2,000 now, but back then about 13,000. And if we looked at the performance for the managers and supervisors, they had a goal of 13,000 for the managers and supervisors. They blew that goal out of the water, and they collected 15,000 of these crew visits. Now, I think one of the major reasons that happened is that when we looked at the directors and executives, They also had a goal of 254, and they blew that out of the water and did 420 as a group. Now, if you have the directors and executives going out and doing these, there's no excuses for the managers and supervisors. And again, if I were a betting man, I would have guessed that these senior level leaders would have done 254 to the T and probably waited till the last quarter to do them. They didn't. That showed that there was value in doing this. I know many of you are just saying, well, yeah, so did it work? Well, did it make a difference? I know I've just been preaching about focusing on leading indicators, but, lagging indicators were a good metric back then. For many years, they felt like they were flat. Once they got the leadership engaged, they started to see a big difference in their safety cultures. So did it work? Yeah, they're hurting fewer people. Not only that, they looked at other leading indicators like number of near misses turned in. They looked at survey questions that said leaders cared more about them. So it did make a difference, and we can measure that. That's leadership analytics. All right, last case study, and then I'll finish up and get some questions. This is a case study on global leadership analytics. Now, this is a global organization, 40 locations around the world. I think they're only not in one country, right? More than 18,000 people. They rolled out a JSA process, and they look at some statistics. Now, for these statistics, these are good, what I call global leadership analytics. So when we look at how many observations or JSA audits they're doing, 318,000 in 215, 6.2 million observations, 316,000, 95% safe. And really, 312 of these were closed out. Right? So as a corporate level leader, I can look at that and say, we are making a difference. Now, what is it telling us? Well, if I were to look at the last 30 days, and I'm a corporate safety executive, I'm seeing that we're having some issues with ascending and descending, lifting, lowering, back, and bending. So I can help my district representatives, safety representatives, go out and at their safety briefings talk about going up and down ladders, making sure that we have good, proper ladders. Right? This gives me some data to go on. Also might identify some areas that we have some problems. And it really gives me some good opportunities. Now, in this case, I call this, again, leadership analytics. What they did is they created a model, and this model had trust, caring, and making it personal. So they translated this kind of theoretical model to leadership activities. So what they did is their leadership metrics aligned with the behaviors they wanted to drive. So to number of JSA audits, they started tracking per location, the number of at-risk things per JSA, and how quickly they closed out open items. And then they could communicate this. And they did a great job of changing how they talked about safety. And again, this is a good leadership opportunity. This is what they communicate, right? A caring conversation occurs somewhere in the world in an organization every 7.5 minutes. An at-risk condition is corrected every 5.5 minutes. Right? This means something to the organization. Now, another way of looking at it, this is the leadership analytics scorecard. If we look at number of observations, number of JSA observations, the action items closed, and how many risky things are seen per audit, this gives us an idea of where we might need to focus. So if we look at Russia, for example, they're having a little bit of a problem. Doesn't look like they're rolling it out, right? That's a leadership metric. There's other organizations that are doing really well. Like in North America, they're having some success. In Northeast Asia, even though they haven't met one of their goals. But this gives us an idea of how the leaders are supporting this process and how we can take this information and truly see how we're doing as an organization. So what I'm really talking about, this leadership analytics and creating this journey to safety culture excellence, is really trying to measure what I call cultural proxies. Like I mentioned earlier, cultural proxies are substitutions for culture. And I don't care what any of those consultants tell you, you cannot measure culture. You can measure people's perception of culture. You can measure people's actions and behaviors and how well they're doing on different processes and systems. Those are all cultural proxies. So again, leadership analytics, if we measure how engaged people are through action, like in the first case study, or through some global metrics that represent activities that people are doing, right? This gives us a better approximation of how good our culture is doing and how close we are at coming to that, ultimate journey of safety culture excellence. So I kind of quickly jumped through a lot of this information. Again, if you have some questions, I'd be happy to answer them. But we first started out this conversation focusing more on the people side, right? I focused on creating that urgency, leadership engagement, and then the process for measuring that, how good we're doing on that roadmap, and then the supporting technology. So with the people side, really, this is essential for the journey, right? It's making sure that we're kind of prepping the rails for change. We're making sure that what we do is going to make a difference. So we have to make sure we have urgency, because without that urgency, people are going to say, well, yeah, we're doing pretty good. We're not hurting people, so why do we need to do something different? So again, it's about changing the efforts from avoiding the burning platform to focusing on creating a really motivational vision. And to do that, leaders are the ones that drive change, right? We have enough safety managers. We need to get more leaders. We need to get them involved and engaged in safety. So to get people engaged, it's not just being involved. I think there's a lot of people involved in safety conversations but not truly engaged. And to do that, we need to measure that. And that's part of the leadership analytics, right? Measuring our journey. So predictive analytics, that's gathering this information using business intelligence to help identify where we need to focus our information, right? It's using our data to avoid that venomous cycle. And we have safety analytics, which is getting more color. The examples that I gave was making sure you're using a severity matrix, making sure that you're collecting the quality of the observations and closing out open items. Those are good leading indicators and safety analytics that we can track and trend. And then finally, if you are rolling out change, we need to measure leadership's engagement. And I call those leadership analytics, right? What metrics can we identify that we can align with the behaviors we expect to see? And how can we track and trend that? And then finally, to help that journey, we have technology that helps facilitate that change. There's apps out there now that can collect audits and inspections, for example, and leadership behaviors, right? And we can get a real-time view on how our culture is doing, tracking that performance and gaps. So, kind of in summary, even though this journey to safety culture excellence is long, the impact on people's lives can be tremendous. Not only because we hurt fewer people, but because the journey builds a lasting, sustainable culture that will survive setbacks, derailments, and strive because of them. Right? We need leadership analytics to help guide us on that journey, to give us feedback before we go down the wrong path. Now, my brother-in-law, Kevin, didn't finish his journey, right? But what he's going to do instead is section hike the AT, the Appalachian Trail, where he's going to do sections at a time. Now he has the right vision, right? It's not about the destination, it's about the journey. He has the urgency. He wants to do it, right? So it's all about creating the right vision, getting people on board, driving urgency, and then measuring that. And then eventually you'll reach that destination of safety culture excellence. And, who knows? Maybe I'll join Kevin on his journey. After all, the Appalachian Trail is right out my back door. Anyway, thank you for joining me. And remember, we need to stop reacting to injuries and start predicting them. We still have some time for some questions. So, again, I'll be happy to answer as many now. And if we don't get to them, I will take the next couple of days. I'm in the I'm in the office, and I'll be able to answer some of these.
Great. Thank you, Chuck. That was a wonderful presentation. Before we start the Q&A, I want to remind everyone of the evaluation survey we're asking you to complete. The survey should be appearing on your screen now. We ask that you consider completing it. Thoughts. Your input is important because it directly goes to improving future webcasts, so please do take the time to fill out the survey. If you don't see the evaluation survey on your screen, please turn off your pop-up blocker. You can also access the survey by clicking the survey button near the lower right of your screen. We have several questions that have come in, Chuck, so let's try to get through as many as we can. I want to start with communication barriers. What are some of the communication barriers to anticipate when first starting to have engagement conversations?
That's a great question, because a lot of these conversations in the past have always been around, all right, well, you're not wearing your glasses, and it's easy to correct that behavior. It's a lot more difficult to strike up a conversation about safety when it doesn't seem like somebody's getting caught doing something wrong. And really, I think how you approach it, right? Again, it's a coaching opportunity. It's not really trying to police somebody. So I think one of the, those 4 engagement questions can help get those conversations started, right? There are some barriers out there. Maybe people perceive they have a lack of knowledge. Well, I don't know what this guy really is doing, so I don't want to go and talk to him because it'll make me look, uninformed, unintelligent, untrained. But it's how you approach, right? So if I go up to someone and say, you know what, to me it looks like that may be risky. I'm not sure, but what do you think? Right? So again, there's approach, and there's some really good gurus out there on how to have good safety conversations. But some of those barriers, I think initially is just I'm nervous about having that conversation without the explicit of fixing something. So
okay,
thanks.
Great.
Any other questions?
Yeah, there's another question regarding employee engagement. Can you provide some examples of employee engagement activities and continuous improvement activities?
Yeah, sure. I think there's a lot. I mean, we could come up with dozens of these. I think the best way of coming up is just sitting your employees down and asking them, the leaders out there that you believe are really engaged in safety, what do they do different from the other people? And then start tracking those. But I think some of the engagement activities that I've seen leaders do can be really varied, like just attending a safety training or leading a safety training, or going out, especially if you're in an executive level, going out and doing an audit with somebody. Some other behaviors that could be like less apparent. One company, they have people reading safety books, and then they have to create a presentation from those books. Another thing, they have someone rotate who is the safety champion, and that safety champion's in charge of gathering some of these analytics. There's a lot of engagement activities out there. But again, if the exercise that I use is envision the best safety leader that you can think of. What did they do to let you know that they truly were engaged in safety? And then start recording those actions. And you want to make sure their behavior is something that can be counted, not just, they support safety. Well, what did they do to support safety?
Okay, great. Thank you, Chuck. This next question seems to come up quite a bit, and I'm interested on your take. How do you overcome the emphasis on productivity and efficiency metrics with safety measurements?
Yeah, you're right. That comes up all the time, right? Productivity, safety, quality, customer satisfaction, on-time delivery, all these metrics are important. And I think what a lot of senior level leaders don't get is that if you focus on safety, productivity and quality will also improve, right? I was just working with a construction company, and they had a huge, of course, focus on where they are in schedule. And that really got people in a position where they feel like they need to take shortcuts to do that. But what they actually found out is when they started focusing on safety, right, that completely improved productivity and quality. Now, how that can impact in a negative way, say, for instance, somebody has a defect right? You have to have the crew go back and fix this part. Now that crew is in the place of maybe the elevator installer, and now they're working on top of each other. That impacts productivity and can impact safety. So I think part of it is identifying some good safety analytics. Because if you're just tracking injuries, people are looking at that and saying, okay, how many injuries have we've had? None. All right, so we're doing good on safety. Next, how are we doing on production? Oh, well, this is where we are on schedule. We have to give leaders something else that they can sink their teeth in. That's why I'm focusing so much on safety analytics and leadership analytics. Right? These are the things that we want to focus on.
Okay, great.
Okay, what else?
Regarding, you spoke a little bit on, going around and seeing where the risks are at, where the potential hazards are. Who's responsible for those fixes? I mean, who is, if there's an audit, who's responsible for correcting the deficiencies that are found?
Oh, that's a good point too. You have to have some method for either having the, tie the maintenance guys into it or the leadership guys into it. To give you an example, one organization, every Monday morning, the president and his team sits down and looks at these open items from safety. That's the first thing they do. And they look at things that have not been closed out from the previous week. And the president says, all right, what do we need to do to get this thing taken care of? Do I need to go and step in? And again, just that visibility helps get these closed out. But you definitely need to identify who's going to be closing these out. Either it's going to be the manager or leader that saw this happen, or it's going to be make sure that it's communicated to the maintenance crew or the safety person in charge. But they're in charge of closing out that open item.
Great, thank you. We have time for one more question. I was intrigued by the venomous cycle that you mentioned. If someone finds themselves in a venomous cycle, what is most important to escaping that type of cycle?
And I think a lot of people find themselves in that venomous cycle. I mean, I bet a handful of people on call today believe their audits and inspections are being pencil whipped. And, again, that comes from losing faith, right? I'm doing this information. Nobody's looking at the data. Why do I need to do it, right? So I think to escape that venomous cycle, we have to start using our observation intelligence, right? If we start identifying the fixes that need to be fixed, identify those. And there's some apps out there that you can take before and after pictures of fixes, right? So there's this great that people have been tripping over for weeks. Take a picture of it before. When it gets fixed, take an after picture, and then post that. Employees love to see things that get fixed. And as a result, people see, the result of their observation. They look at that and say, wow, okay, so now I see why I need to do this, because I can get this thing taken care of or fixed. So I really think that's part of making it a value proposition. We can get out of that by identifying those opportunities to demonstrate that we are engaged in safety, that we do care about safety. And if we communicate those successes, right, it's something that we can improve. It's achievement-oriented, right, and it's something that we can measure and people can see. That's one of the best ways of getting out of it, is just acting on the data that you're collecting.
Okay, great. Thank you. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. I apologize that we did not get to everyone's questions. There were a bunch that came in. But again, all of these unanswered questions will be forwarded on to Chuck. Once again, I hope you take the time to fill out the evaluation survey on your screen so you can give us your feedback. And that ends today's Safety and Health Magazine webcast. I'd like to thank Chuck, Predictive Solutions, and every one of you who listened in. Thank you, and have a great day.
Thank you, people, for attending. And if you have any other questions, I'll try to get to them as soon as possible, and I'll have a white paper out as well. Thanks a lot. Take care.
Hello, and welcome to today's Safety and Health webcast, Leadership Analytics, the missing piece in your journey to safety culture excellence, sponsored by Predictive Solutions. My name is Kyle Morrison. I'm the Senior Associate Editor with Safety and Health magazine, and I'll be moderating today's session. Thank you for joining us. In a few minutes, we'll start the presentation, but first I'd like to go over some housekeeping items. The views of the speaker and his organization are his own and do not necessarily reflect